All right, guys. So last week our focus was on factoring. So now we're going to actually start solving by factoring. So if you look at the orange paper I gave you, kind of gives you a glimpse into the rest of this chapter. So the orange paper, coral color, I don't care what we want to call that color. Salmon, there we go. I'm going to call it orange because it's just easier to say. So on that paper, it has for the 4 methods for solving quadratic equations. This whole chapter is quadratics, which means x squared. Okay, so everything we do in this chapter is going to be based on x squared. So the first method is factoring. That's your first column. Then you have square root method, which we'll be getting to shortly. Then we have completing the square and the quadratic formula. I'm going to bet probably about half of you, I bet, know the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared, that huge formula. Okay, so that's coming also. All right, but we're going to start with factoring. Okay, and again, the orange paper, anything colored papers, you can use those on your final exam. Obviously, I'm going to let you write on this one because there's nothing on it. Okay, so as we go through each section, we will be adding steps to that paper. Okay, but today, this section actually has factoring and graphing. We are not doing any of the graphing. Okay, we do more with graphing in the next chapter. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about, though, is the zero product property. All that means, kind of put it in layman's terms, if I have a times b equals 0, then what do you know about either a or b? One of them has to equal 0. Yeah, one of them's got to. So then a equals 0 or b equals 0. That is the zero product property. If you're multiplying 2 things together and it equals 0, then one of them has to be 0 in order for that to happen. Okay? So using that property, we can try to actually solve. Notice all 3 of these are already in factored form, right? They're already with our parentheses and all that good stuff. So the first one, 5 times x equals 0. What does x equal? 0. Right? Because then 5 times 0 equals 0. That's true. Okay, this one. So kind of using what we just talked about up here, one of these has to be 0, right? So either this piece or this piece has to equal 0. So x could be 0, or x minus 3 equals 0, right? One piece or the other has to be 0 in order for that to happen. So x equals 0 is one answer. Solve this one, add 3 to the other side. X equals 3. Now I want to kind of make sure you're understanding what's happening with this. So that means if I plug a 3 back in, wherever I see x, does that work? 3 minus 3 is, and then 0 times 3 is 0. So it works. What if I plug in a 0? 0 times 0 minus 3. 0 minus 3 is negative 3 times 0 equals 0. Still works. Okay, so we found there are 2 answers in that one. Either one works, and we still get 0 in the end. Okay, so x plus 2 times x minus 1 equals 0. Again, back up to this. Either this one equals 0 or that one. So x plus 2 equals 0, or x minus 1 has to be 0. And then can we solve both of those for x? Yeah. So x equals negative 2, or x equals 1. How are we feeling with the basic concept of the zero product property? Sounds fancy. I don't care if you ever remember that it's called that, as long as you know how it works. All right. Also, just kind of a little foreshadowing into chapter 5, which we'll get to eventually, is back up into here. Since we're not going to do the graphing in this section, but I do want you to see how this works. Wherever you're solving for, that's where your graph, if you would graph it, that's where it crosses the x-axis. It'd be right where it crosses on the x-axis. Those are your answers. Since we're solving always for 0, you may hear somebody say, can you find the zeros of this problem instead of just solve? It just means set it equal to 0 and solve it. All right, so steps for solving by factoring. So first, put equation in standard form. So we know what standard form is? That is slope-intercept form. No, you're fine. Someone always tells me that. Christian? Okay. Oh, gotcha. Adrian? No? Yes? It does equal 0. Yeah. So the first thing, you were right on the equal 0 part. But what we're looking for is it's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, so that's standard form. One, it's always set equal to 0. But the other part of that is, notice the order. Does that look familiar to how we've been factoring? It's always x squared, then x, then your number, and then equals 0. Okay, so put it in standard form. Factor it completely. So pull out GCFs, 2 sets of parentheses, do all that factoring. And then you will set each factor equal to 0 and solve, which is what we just worked on the previous slide. So on your salmon colored paper, underneath factoring, let's go ahead and jot this down there. That way we can kind of keep this all together as we go through this chapter. So there's your steps. Put it in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Factor it completely, and then set each factor equal to 0 and solve. Yep, all of that goes underneath factoring. Yeah, so as we get through each method, we'll keep adding to that paper so you have everything all in one spot together. Yeah, our test over this chapter, it's a doozy. It's a big test, because we have 4 different methods of solving, and I'll ask you to solve specifically using each method, and then I also ask you to solve using any method you want, but then you have to decide what's the right method to use, because not everything can be solved using every method. Because does everything factor? No, not everything factors. Yeah, this rain outside makes me want to take a nap. It rained all day yesterday. All day. Yeah, I napped yesterday, laid around, played a board game with my kids. It's kind of nice. What? You slept? Sleeping's kind of nice, isn't it? I don't know why my littlest one, why she gets mad when I make her take a nap. I wish somebody would make me take a nap. Like, here, let me put you in bed and read you a story. I'm like, thank you. Please do. It'd be great. All right. Oh, I love her. Oh, that's a rarity for a child. Kudos for you. You made your mom's life easy. All right, guys, here we go. So we're going to solve by factoring. So first thing, number 1, is it in standard form? You have your x squared, your x, your number equals 0. Yep, we're good there. So next step is to factor. Is there a GCF? No? Okay, so let's go ahead and set up our parentheses for factoring. So my last one is negative, so my signs are opposite. Good. Options for A. Options for C. And do we know which option it is? 6 and 3. And again, if you're not sure, we can check. It gives me 6x minus 3x is 3x, which does work. Now, my hope is that the more we factor, the more you guys do that checking in your head, okay? That is my hope. If you're at a spot where you're like, I really need to write it down, then write it down. That's okay. But that is my hope eventually as we keep going that you get better and you can just kind of check those in your head. All right, so once we factor, step 3 was set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So we'll have x plus 6 equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0, and then we solve. So x equals negative 6, then we add 3, x equals positive 3. Now, one thing, and it'll be more important into the next chapter, but I like to kind of give you a little bit at a time here. Since this problem started off with an x squared, notice how many answers you have. 2. What do you think if it was an x cubed? You'd have 3 answers. X to the 4th, you'd have 4 answers. Yeah. So something to keep in mind as we progress into the next chapters. That does come up a lot. All right, number 2. What do we do first? Yeah, I got to add that 12 back to the other side, right? Because it's not in the right form. So x squared minus 7x. If I move the 12 over here, it becomes positive 12 equals 0. So first thing, it's got to be in the right form. Your x squared, your x, and your number equals 0. No GCF, so I can go right to my parentheses. Last one's positive. My signs are, they're the same. Both plus or both minus? Both minus. Good. Options for A. Oh, I like these easy factoring ones, right? Not many options. Options for C. All right, and which one do we want to go with? It is 3 and 4. Again, if you're checking, that'd be negative 3x minus 4x. Does give me negative 7x, so we're good. Make sure you have your equals 0 after it. I know it's a little different from what we have been doing. And then we set each one equal to 0 and solve. So add 3, add 4. So x equals 3 and 4. Now, do we have to show our work in solving? That was your question, right? Yeah, no. I'm showing you now because I want to make sure you see where it's coming from. But yeah, as we keep going, you'll notice my work gets less and less, okay? And I'm totally fine with that. As long as as we go, you'll see me go from here to here with nothing in between, okay? And you guys will too, as you get more practice and get comfortable with it. If you're comfortable now, by all means, that's totally fine. But if you need to write it out, write it out. All right, what about the next one? Yeah, let's subtract the 3x. So 4x squared minus 3x. It would. Now, the only reason I say it would is if I move the 4x squared, it becomes negative. And then my first one's negative. Then I got to take it out. So you'll notice I will always move things to keep that x squared term positive. That way I don't have to worry about that negative sign. Now, this is probably the easiest problem I could give you. And I have students every year who think this problem is so hard. They have no idea. They're like, I don't know how to factor that. It's 2 terms, but it doesn't meet my requirements. So like, I don't know what to do. What's the first thing you look for? Take an x out. There's a GCF in there. Once I take out an x, we have 4x minus 3. If you don't have an x squared anymore, we can't factor. Guess what? That's factored right there. You just took out the x. We're factored. So set them equal to 0. Yeah. So x equals 0. That's an easy one. And then 4x minus 3 equals 0. So add 3. Then divide by 4. So we get 0, and then we get 3/4. There are 2 answers. And that's what happens every year. People are like, I don't know what to do with that. I'm like, oh my gosh, GCF, then you're done. Like, it's the easiest one I could give you. Oh, that's painful. I am personally offended on that one. If you give me a decimal on that one, I would not count it wrong because that decimal terminates. It's 0.75. But if you gave me a decimal on like 1/3, wrong. Because you can't write 0.3 repeating forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And don't put a line over top of it, because if I ask you to put that back in your calculator later, you can't put a line over it in your calculator, right? So, no. But if it terminates, I'll let it slide. But if you round it, wrong. So what's the best choice? Fractions. Why would you switch it to a decimal? I didn't have to do any work. I didn't need a calculator. Just, I know you guys are so trained for decimals in your head. I don't understand why. Fractions are like exact. They're perfect. I love it. So you're telling me and my kids' teachers are going to go round and round? All right. I feel bad for their teachers already. All right, guys, number 4. Ooh, what do I do with that? Is it already in standard form? Yeah, it is. All right, it's set equal to 0. It's in the right order. Yeah, okay. So to factor, you would take out a what? A -2. Right, if you take out a -2, be careful of your signs. We're going to have x squared minus 9 equals 0. Ooh. Does that factor further? It's my favorite. Bring down your baby brother. Good. X plus 3, x minus 3. That's your difference of squares. Your parents will be like, what are you learning in school? Yeah. Do you have a little brother I don't know about? What's going on? All right. So from here, this is where a lot of students get themselves a little stumped. Baby brother. Does he matter as far as solving? He's not an answer. Not an answer. It's not because he's on the outside, because this was on the outside. What's the difference? That's an x. You're solving for x. Yeah, you're solving for your variable. I always think of it as x marks the spot, right? X is not there. All baby brother did was allow me to get something that I can then factor so I can actually solve. Okay? So in this case, baby brother, yeah, he's great. If it just said factor, I'd need to have him there. But if it's solving, he's not part of my answer. So I said each part with an x in it equal to 0. So then x equals -3 and x equals +3. And again, a lot of students are like, well, isn't -2 an answer also? Well, go back to the beginning. What did we talk about? It's an x squared. How many answers should you have? 2. They're right there. So do I need to do anything with baby brother after I pull him out? No. Okay. If there was an x with him, then yes, you would. But if there's no x with baby brother, he just allowed me to be able to factor. The next one? Okay. All right, the next one, what do we have to do first? Good. Let's put it in standard form. So 2x squared, bring that over, becomes plus 5x. Bring that over, becomes -3 equals 0. But again, as you're moving things and rearranging, my preference is I always move things so my x squared is positive, because I don't want to take out a negative if I don't have to. So on this one, could you have moved everything to the other side? You could have. If you move that over, it would have come a positive 2x squared. Move that one over, it became a positive 18. You would have just taken out a 2 instead of -2. So totally up to you. All right, GCF? No. So I can go right to my parentheses. Last one's negative. My signs are opposite. Options for A. All right, so 1x and 2x. Options for C. Man, I am way too nice to you guys. There's not many options. You want to go 1 and 3 or 3 and 1? 3 and 1? That would give me 6x minus 1x is 5x. So that worked. All right, and then set each factor equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0, and 2x minus 1 equals 0. So x equals -3. Here we'll get 2x equals 1. Divide by 2. Christian, what's 1 divided by 2? No, I don't want a decimal. 1/2. I'm just seeing what you'd answer me. If you would tell me 0.5 or if you'd say 1/2. Again, would I count you wrong if you told me 0.5? No, I wouldn't. But why? How are we feeling so far about solving by factoring? Pretty good? Not too bad, right? All right, why don't you guys try 6 and 7 on your own? All right, so number 6, I noticed a couple people had some issues with number 6 because when they moved this over, and all of you seem to do that fine, some of you left the 2 here and then put the 6x on the end. Remember, it needs to be x squared, then x, then number. So I want to put the minus 6x here. And then some of you, for some reason, took this -2 and changed it to +2. It didn't move, right? The only thing that moved was this, so it should still be a -2. All right, so I saw a couple people make each of those mistakes. All right, GCF? 2. So we're left with 10x squared minus 3x minus 1. Don't forget, you do need that 1. Some of you pulled out that 2, and then suddenly you only had 2 terms left inside your parentheses instead of 3. All right, Then from there, we can set up our parentheses. Last one is negative, so we can go plus minus. Options here, we have 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. You guys want 2x and 5x, correct? All right, and then options here is just 1 and 1. It gives me 5x minus 2x, so my signs are backwards. There we go. I add or subtract depending on what the signs are. Like for this, that would give me negative 5x, and that would give me a positive 2x. So I would do negative 5x plus 2x. The way I had it first was backwards from that, right? So it just depends what signs are. Whatever sign's in front of it is what I do with it. All right, baby brother, does he matter in my answer? No. All right, because X marks the spot. Yeah. You found it, didn't you? You all right? All right, so we get 2x equals 1. So x equals a positive half. And then 5x equals negative 1. So x equals negative 1/5. All right, so half and negative 1/5. A couple of you, I walked around, you had it factored beautifully, and then you stopped. So make sure if it says to solve, your x equals whatever the actual answer is. Christian? You got a positive 1 over negative 5? That's fine. It don't matter. Yeah, with negatives, they either on top, on bottom, or out in front of it all means the same thing. As long as there's one negative, it's totally fine. All right, and then number 7, those numbers got a little scary, right? They're kind of big. So set it equal to 0, standard form, and if that is a plus 48. Was there a GCF in there? 4. So if I take out my 4, is this problem as scary as it was to begin with? No, it's not scary at all. Because your options for A, just got x and x. Right? X and x. They're both negative. Good. And then we got 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. It's 3 and 4. For this one, trial and error, that's what most students do at this point. The reason this one's faster to see, since both of these are just x and x, there's no number with them, then 3 and 4 make 7. I don't have to worry about it multiplying by something else. Yeah, so if your A value is just a 1, they're real easy to spot. But does trial and error always work? Yeah, it does. But you did 2 and 6, checked it, and we're like, oh, that ain't right. Right? And we're right back to the drawing board. Yeah. Yeah, it's fine. All right, so we should have gotten x equals 3 and x equals 4. I didn't show my work on there, but are we okay? 3 and 4? Good, yes. All right, we got 2 to go, guys. Number 8. Oh, what's going on up there? A lot. You've got a lot of x's going on up there. I have like terms. Yeah. So when I go to move this, I'm going to move everything over here, so my x squared is positive. But notice you have some like terms going on. So we have 6x squared. What does this become? That's a 7x. Don't forget there's a 1 there. So 8 minus 1 is 7x. And then I'll move the 5 over. Minus 5 equals 0. Okay, so when you have more than one x or more than one x squared or numbers or whatever, just put your like terms together when you move them. GCF? Nope. All right, no GCF, so we'll go through our trial and error. Now this one does need trial and error because your A value, there's a number there. All right, what are my signs? They're opposite, right? That last one's negative, so they're plus minus. All right, options for A. 1 and 6, 2 and 3. You got a preference? 2 and 3? 2x, 3x? Do we know that right off the bat? No, not necessarily. All right, options for C. 1 and 5. So 1 and 5. And we'll check it. So again, back to that, do I add them or subtract them? Again, it depends on what I have. So then that's going to give me negative 10x. So I would do 3 minus 10, because that's the way it's written. Yep. So that gives me negative 7x. So yeah, my signs are just flip-flopped. So that should be the plus. That should be the minus. I'm messing up with, okay. Hey, but as long as we're figuring out what's wrong with them, that's what we want to get towards the end of this. And we factor seriously like every day almost, like all semester long. So we want to make sure we're figuring out those things. All right, so then we said each factor equal to 0. And we solve. So we'll get 2x equals 1. So x equals half. 3x equals negative 5. Divide by 3. So x equals negative 5/3. Are we allowed to leave improper fractions? Yes, I prefer them. You will notice on anything I give you, any activities we do in the classroom, whatever, you will never see me switch that to negative 1 and 2/3. Never. I always leave them improper. Because if you're dealing with fractions, I do a lot of them in my head. They are so much easier to deal with improper than they are as mixed numbers. Okay? So you'll notice I always leave them improper. All right. Number 9, last one on your own. So like some of you on this one, and you move the 18 over, you said 18 and 2, you're like, oh, that's 20. It's not 20. Yeah, because you got to subtract that. They're both just numbers. Right, you could write it in as a 0x if you really wanted to. All right, because then this is my favorite, right? How's that factor? That's 4x, not 4x, 3x. I need to go home. 3x plus 4 and 3x minus 4. All right, that's your difference of squares. So then setting each of them equal to 0, you'd get negative 4/3 over here and a positive 4/3 over there. All right, so just be careful, guys. Anytime you're moving things, plain number with plain number, those are like terms. Put them together. X with x's, put them together. An x squared and an x squared, put them together. Okay, so if you, yes, absolutely. And again, like if you have 2 terms, you can always try for a GCF. No matter what it's there, you can always try for GCF. But other than that, 2 terms, if you have an x squared and a number, they need to be perfect squares and a minus sign. And also, guys, at this point in the game, if I give you something and I ask you to solve by factoring, it will solve by factoring, okay? Now, later on in the test, yeah, that's a whole different ballgame. I can try to trick you. But here, we're just practicing the skill.